Thank you, Steve, and thank you everybody for taking the time out this morning to come and listen to Rahul and myself ramble on to you. Hopefully you'll find it an interesting session, and yeah, I mean, we're really looking forward to delivering this in person and meeting a lot of you, and hopefully our intention was to make it a really interactive session, which could be a little bit more difficult today, but we will, as Steve said, we will be taking questions at the end of the session, so please do put something through that you perhaps want us to talk about in more detail, or have a direct question to discuss with us, and at the end obviously we'll give our contact details to take anything further in more detail if that is appropriate. But yeah, thanks again everyone, and to be myself and Rahul, who'll be quite interchangeable this morning throughout session, talking through different parts of our presentation. Cool. So what are we going to talk about? So obviously we need to talk about community investment strategy, and ultimately how that can then link to income generation opportunities for the sector. So we're kind of going to run through a little introduction about who we are, so and why we're here kind of talking to you about this, then to give a background to community investment strategy and why it's important, and how that links to a really good income generation approach. Then what makes a great strategy? How do you formulate that? How do you utilize that? And how do you make that work for you as an organization to deliver amazing community outcomes, but also to drive that agenda around income generation? Then we'll talk quite specifically about some of the areas that we think are really vibrant in terms of opportunities for the sector to go and generate additional external revenue and capital investment for some of the work that you'll be doing. And then looking at perhaps some of the underpinning structural challenges and opportunities to really make this go further, particularly linked to governance and kind of legal form as well. Right, so just a quick bit about who we are. So we are from a company called OAKS, and we work nationally and internationally actually around three core areas, which I think we've successfully highlighted on this slide, which are strategy, income generation, and implementation. So the next slide will kind of show a bit of a flavour of who we work with and the kind of sectors we work within. But whoever it is we're supporting, we always stay true to these kind of three key areas of expertise and focus, which we think are absolutely crucial, obviously, to all organisations. But we are particularly focused on socially minded organisations. We have a very strong social purpose ourselves, and everything that we do, it always comes back to supporting organisations who are trying to do something good and something valuable for their respective communities. So everybody we work with always, without question, has a focus on delivering amazing community impact. So that socially minded part underpins everything that we do, no matter what the organisation, what the sector. And again, I think it's really important, we've really deliberately highlighted those last three lines about how we work with people. So absolutely we're there to challenge kind of the norm, to challenge what's happened previously, to challenge preconceptions about how things should be done, to come hopefully with our vast experience and expertise to bring new ideas to the table, but in a very supportive way, so very, very much critical friend. Then we are absolutely there to be part of an organisation to help them to realise their potential, so to be part of a long-term journey, and then ultimately to support those organisations to more often than not diversify income and help to build more sustainable and kind of more impactful organisations. So it's very much a collaborative, long-term focus view that we take with our clients. Great. So like I say, sector-wise, we are very much focused on predominantly not-for-profit focused organisations, but a real broad section of the not-for-profit sector. So from sport, which is where we started, right through to education, right across the third sector, all levels of charitable organisations working across all sorts of different areas of impact and outcomes. So social housing is an area that we are really starting to build a good footprint in the last couple of years. and then the corporate sector being one that we work with in a slightly different way. So when we work with a corporate organisation, it's to help them to think about how they can either develop a CSR strategy or support the not-for-profit sector itself. So everything we do, as you can see there, comes back to that social purpose. And social housing, like we are not proclaiming to be sector experts. Our background is not in social housing, so we'll be really upfront about that. But we joined the Aquila group last year, and part of the reason for that was all the work that we do, like the Aquila services group felt that was something that was really well suited to the social housing sector. And that was our experience historically when we've worked within the sector. And it's absolutely kind of reaffirmed that in the last couple of years with the work that we've been doing in this space. And what we've always found across all the sectors we work in is that it's really, really helpful sometimes to have an organisation come in who aren't embroiled in the kind of historical politics and the historical norms of how things are done, actually to bring a new perspective that comes from multiple different places. So we find that to be a real advantage to the work that we do. Great, and this was just to give a bit of a snapshot, to give a bit of the sense of the variety of clients that we work with. So absolutely, there's some smaller housing associations that we've worked with and are working with in the past or at the moment, but there's, just to give a flavour of some of the other sectors we work in, people like the Money Charity, right through to UEFA, Magic Bus, who are an international development charity based in India with headquarters in various parts of the world as well. So yeah, just quite a broad mix of organisations from different sectors, which, like I say, helps to bring a fresh, unique perspective to the work that we do.
Great, thank you, Luke. So just enough about us. Moving on to the kind of the subject matter at hand. So we're here to talk about community investment, but I guess what do we mean by community investment, and how does that fit within the sector? Because we know that different housing associations call it community investment, call it social impact, call it community engagement. We know that there are lots of different terms and different ways of describing how a housing association or how a registered provider engages with their community. We know that housing associations have always played a critical role in tackling social challenges. There are over the years, probably going back hundreds of years, examples of housing associations improving the health of their residents, building skills amongst their residents. So this is not a new topic area by any means. We know that housing associations, and I'm sure you know, that are uniquely positioned within some of the nation's most vulnerable communities to help tackle some of those social challenges. And that we know that many of the housing associations we speak to on a daily basis recognise that building strong communities is as important as building homes. So I think we're all on the same lines. Housing, whilst there are lots of different terms, lots of different ways of describing community investment, I think there is a picture across housing where organisations are investing in the needs of their community. And also, I think an interesting point to highlight is that housing associations are extremely well placed to bring partners together from other sectors, which is kind of the angle that we come at it from. So a bit like Luke just illustrated, we work in lots of other sectors, in sport, in education, in the third sector, where organisations are doing incredible things to improve the lives of people from some of the most vulnerable communities in the country. And housing associations have a unique position within that because of their access to these individuals. So yeah, just to put a bit of context into what do we mean by community investment. So obviously we're in a unique time at the moment. Won't go on too much about COVID-19, but just from our conversations with housing associations before the virus over the last year or two, our understanding of the kind of community investment landscape in housing is that we know that housing associations are under ongoing funding pressures and have been for a sustained period of time now, with restrictions to grants and income over that period. But as a result of that, we know that society is under, has been under stricter pressures, and communities are becoming more reliant on housing associations to deliver vital services beyond housing, whether that is some of the things I already mentioned around, health programs or digital inclusion programs, or support with individuals going into employment, and everything else that comes with that. But we know that communities are becoming increasingly more reliant on housing associations to provide those services. And we know that housing associations have responded really well to that. And there are huge levels of investment in community engagement across the sector, which is fantastic, and obviously demonstrates the commitment from registered providers to deliver impact for their communities. But what we have kind of discovered is that there are relatively low levels of planning linked to that. So very few, I'll say the minority of organisations in the sector have a actual community investment strategy. And there's, as far as we can tell, and conversations with other kind of specialists in the area, there is no sector agreed planning and reporting on outcomes. So every organisation in the sector reports on their community impacts in a different way. We know that there have been attempts by organisations like HACT to try and regulate in a less formal way. But on the whole, it's still a developing area. So whilst there are huge levels of investment into communities, there are low levels of long-term strategic planning and low levels of reporting compared to some of the other sectors that Luke and I have mentioned already. Here's just a couple of examples of organisations that we've seen in the sector reporting on their social impact and their community investment. So I think that's Gen 2 and Sanctuary. So obviously two of the largest, certainly in Sanctuary's case. Demonstrating huge investment into their community. A lot of the figures are financial related, as you can, just the highlights are in terms of the number of the thousands of pounds that have been invested, or the hundreds of thousands of pounds that have been invested in communities, the savings that have been made by advising their residents on how to better manage their utility bills, and things like that. There are very few stories, and also the things that are being measured are not necessarily the same across those organisations. But what it does show is that there has been a huge commitment by some housing associations into their community. But I won't dwell on this slide too long. The real question is, what does this look like post COVID-19? So we've been doing a bit of a survey with our partners at Altair. And I mean, some of these are obviously obvious, but ultimately housing associations are under even stricter funding pressures, naturally. Communities are even more in need, or are significantly more reliant on housing associations to provide some of those services that they were providing pre-COVID-19. And as a result, we're seeing that many associations are saying to us and via this survey that they're likely to increase their investment this year. So if they spent £1 million last year on community activity, they're likely to increase this as a result of COVID-19 rather than reduce. I think there were probably fears, and there have been fears in some of the other sectors we work in, that there will be less money to spend on community engagement. But actually, organisations, we've been glad to see that organisations in housing are prioritising investment into these areas as a direct result of COVID-19. And whilst they are investing more, and likely to invest more this year, the priorities of where that money is spent are likely to change as a result of COVID-19. So an enhanced focus on digital inclusion and employability, although those are two themes that housing associations are very prominent across social impact in housing, and that obviously society is even in more of need of those kind of thematic areas, and we're seeing that housing associations intend to spend a lot more money on those areas moving forward. So what's the challenge, I suppose, with community investment? as we just kind of said, there's a pressing need to provide vital services quickly. So whereas in previous years, housing associations have been doing the things that they think their communities need, or the communities are telling them they need, there is naturally a enhanced need to deliver greater services more quickly. What that means, though, is that organisations are spending more money during this period, and likely to spend more money this year, but they reactively rather than proactively. So responding directly to the needs of organisations, as quickly as possible, which is fantastic. It's absolutely what's needed right now, but will mean that in the long term, it might hamper the strategy and the community activity over the next 2 to 3 years. So organisations are spending money on the things that are needed for their communities right now, but there is no real, I suppose, guidance at the moment on where that money should be spent, how that money should be reported, how do we track that impact moving forwards, and therefore there's a danger that housing associations will be replicating work, or not necessarily using best practice from other housing associations, or pulling in best practice from other sectors as well. We know there are lots of, thousands of charities and organisations in sport and education who have ready-made solutions to some of the needs that housing associations are seeking to meet, and there might not, as a result of everyone having to rush to deliver community engagement during this period and support their residents, there's a danger that we won't necessarily bring in that expertise from other sectors too.
Great, thank you, Rahul. So, community strategy. Such a common mistake that we see across all the sectors we work in is organisations thinking, we're doing some great things, we should be able to get more revenue for this. We should be able to go and get sponsorship, or we should be getting more grant funding or local authority support because we've done a great project or we've got a great idea. And it's the two things are so intertwined. Having a really clear, coherent strategy as to what we're doing and why we're doing it and what the impact will be, to that business plan / income generation strategy that is perfectly aligned to say these things will meet these needs. And so we can't talk about one without the other, and the strategy clearly has to come first. And that is something that, we can't emphasize enough how important and crucial that is to the income generation planning and journey. And a good strategy, we always say, is effectively like the compass that's guiding the organisation and making sure it doesn't get lost. So it will not only drive every investment decision that you make internally, the resources that you've got, but also it will be the thing that informs the external fundraising plan. So it'll be the thing that goes out to look for, whether it's funding, if it's partnerships, that strategy is the thing that should be guiding every decision. And that needs to run from top to bottom of the organisation. So from trustees and directors right through to volunteers, everybody should be really clear on what the purpose is of the organisation, what the objectives are, what things we're going to do, what things we aren't going to do. And that will help inform all of the plans, all the activities, then ultimately all of that ability to bring partners on board and bring external investment in. So we're going to do a little bit of focus on this first because we think it's so crucial to kind of making all of this happen and leveraging external investment to build sustainability in and of itself, to reduce ultimately the amount that you as an organisation have to invest of your own resources in this work, make your own resources go a hell of a lot further. So we'll talk through a bit of a process that we would go through normally with an organisation around strategic planning, which is not set in stone and would be completely bespoke to each organisation's needs in terms of where they're at already, what skills, resources, capacity they have in the organisation, what level of strategic planning understanding is already there. So it's not a set in stone process, but we just want to kind of talk through making sure it's as comprehensively covered as possible so that it can be as strong a strategy as it could possibly be. So these 5 areas we've got on the screen at the moment are clearly crucial. So going through strategic process helps to review what's been done in the past and enables you to benchmark where you sit against competitors or equivalent organisations, or organisations you're aspiring to be like in terms of your community investment work. Clearly define strategic objectives that are matched to smart targets that have accountability for everybody involved in the organisation is fundamental to making this really work and really embedding a strategic plan within the organisation's day-to-day operation, which moves on to the next one around actually, can we build a strategic plan that reflects what's realistic within the capacity that we have, but also does that help to inform, shape what capacity we might need, what the future organisational structure might look like, and culturally, does it reflect where we're at the moment, or does it reflect where we want to get to, and how, and then what do we need to do to make sure that the culture moves in the right direction to make sure that the community strategy is really, really embedded in everything that we do and all of our core measures internally and externally. So measurable outcomes absolutely linked to the objectives. It's about, at the end of this process, this whatever time period that is, it's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, what are the things we're going to be able to stand there and say, we can proudly say we delivered X, Y, and Z things, and that's what we're here to do, and we can prove it, and this is ultimately what we've been driving towards for this whole period. And then the last one is again, it's just about having the strategy. It's imperative to get partners on board, whether that's key stakeholders to buy into the work that you're doing, to form partnerships that can be much richer than looking at a single project and looking at more deeply embedded partnership. But obviously, crucially, similarly, it'll also be about helping people come on board who've got resources to invest as well. So whether that's funding partners, if it's individual donors, if it's corporate partners, whoever it is, it's about making sure we can really articulate why their involvement, their engagement, their support was going to make a really big impact. So crucial. These are kind of the key steps that we would recommend any organisation go through when developing that strategy. So I'll run through these quickly. To start on the left-hand side, firstly, just building that awareness across the team. I'm sure there'll be lots of people in every organisation who have absolutely really clear idea of why the strategy is important and what it will do for the organisation, but it's making sure we get that buy-in right across, for whether that's some potentially sceptical trustees, directors, if it were volunteers who perhaps didn't really understand why it's important, how it affect their role. Right from the outset, make sure everybody in the organisation is aware and bought into the need for this strategy and what we're trying to do. Will make this go much, much further. Similarly, identifying internal champions will achieve the same outcome, because that's the ownership can't sit with an executive team or a board. It has to sit right through the organisation, and to make it work, that means people need to be really on board and really feeling ownership of parts of the strategic plan and planning process. So again, identifying people who are going to retake this forward is massively important. Stakeholder mapping and consultation. You can only go so far on your own. So making sure all the right partners within your respective ecosystem are engaged, can input, and making sure that whatever we develop reflects their needs is going to be massively important to bring people on board. Reviewing, benchmarking everything that's been done so far. What's good, what's not so good, where do we have germs of ideas that could formulate part of the future plans. That's a really, really kind of honest reflection on what's worked well and not so well so far. Identifying best practice from elsewhere, and that can be within social housing, it can be within the wider finance sector, it could be completely from all sorts of different places that you wouldn't even think would be linked to the kind of what you're trying to do, just to try and get ideas of different ways of articulating goals, different ways of articulating the kind of things that you're trying to do. So best practice and benchmarking is certainly something that helps to stimulate new ideas. Prioritization need to focus areas, absolutely. Again, we're going to have a whole host of ideas probably when we're going through this planning process, things we could be doing, things that would be nice to do for our communities, but going back to the point around building something that's in line with the capacity and resource you've got, it's crucial to make sure we can come up with what are those things that are absolutely our core mission, our core goals that we're trying to achieve. So prioritization and goal setting is something to be done quite early on in the process. Then we move on to that activity mapping. So we know what we're trying to achieve. We know what the impact's going to look like, how are we going to actually do that? So what are the actual deliverables and activities we need to deliver to make this happen? And then how do we build that into an evolving journey in the next 3 to 5 years? So we've got capacity right now, and we've got capability to deliver certain parts of the strategy. Inevitably, an ambitious strategy will grow, and we'll show new areas that we don't necessarily have the resource to deliver right now. So it's how do we build that capacity and capability modeling into our plans? And it's about having something drafted. So we've got, okay, so we've thought all this through, we've got some initial ideas on paper. Then we want to circulate that to internal members of the team to get their views, to people who haven't been as involved potentially in the process. But similarly, to kind of test that with key stakeholders, whether that's funding partners, regulators, potential new partners, making sure we're really making this is hitting the right notes for those types of people who are going to be crucial to our long-term success, because we only get to do this once. You can't refresh a 5-year strategy with a completely new direction every year without it looking like we don't know what we're doing. So we need to try and get this as right as possible from the start. So taking that feedback on board, making refinements and review to make sure that we're really happy with that final plan, and then making a big deal about launching it, because it's about making people aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and actually making a bit of a position statement out to the world to say, this is who we are, this is how we're going the extra mile for our beneficiaries and our communities, and we want you to come and be a part of it. And then goes the real work side of it. Once we've got the plan, actually going out, implementing the plan and monitoring it, evaluating our performance, adapting where we need to, and reporting back internally and then externally in terms of the impacts being delivered, and being really honest about that, to say, here's what we've learned, here's how we're going to improve, but ultimately here's the success we're delivering for the people that we're here to support. Cool. And we've just dropped in an example of one strategy that we've done in the last 12 months, just to show a bit of what a look and feel might look like for people who might not be so familiar with community strategies. These can all be completely different and modelled in ways to suit the organisation. So some strategies that we work on are literally a single page or a poster which just has the objectives and the core purpose, because that's all people will read. Others where it's a much more detailed document that really goes into great depth about how everything's going to be achieved. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's about what's right for the organisation. So yeah, this is just to highlight a bit of a flavour of one of the strategies we've worked on recently. And this was just an interesting model that because for Leicester City and the community are the charitable arm of Leicester City Football Club, and what they are absolutely passionately committed to their local community, so that Leicester and Leicestershire. So they've come up with a unique model around delivering place-based community hubs within their area. So unique for a football-related charity, I should say. So their commitment was to build these 8 hyper-local community hubs within the communities they serve, which all will be built from the bottom up. It will be stakeholder-led to shape what the particular needs are in those areas, what kind of interventions were required to help their communities. So no set view on exactly how that's going to be delivered in each hub, and then looking to grow that to the 8 hubs. So again, as I said earlier, at the start of the strategy process, they've got resource to start 2 or 3 of those hubs. By the end of the 4-year period, they're going to have all 8 up and running operationally, and they're already well on the way with that journey, and it's been really well received by all of their partners, and it's already helped them to attract more external funding. So ultimately, we need to think about it as something to guide our internal planning, our internal resource allocation. But then once it's ready, it's all about how do we utilise this to drive external investment, external revenue into the organisation to help us achieve more.
Great, thank you, Luke. I've been informed that my beard is interfering with my microphone, so I can only apologise for that. If anyone, if Mark or Steve could give me a wave if it still interferes at any point, and I'll readjust. So sorry about that. So moving on to how do we generate income for our community strategy? So there are obviously lots of different mechanisms for this, and we see that housing associations obviously do commit their own resources, quite significantly in some cases. We work with some organisations who commit upwards of £10 million a year to community investment, but of course not every organisation will be in a position to do that. So how do we make our resources go further? By securing funding from other sources in order to deliver on some of those community objectives. So this wheel, for want of a better word, is the kind of model that we use across all of our sectors. And I'll just run through what I mean by each of these 6 areas. Of course, there are more, but we find that these kind of 6 titles broadly capture most of the income generating possibilities for organisations in general, but also specifically for community activity as well. So I'll start with trusts and foundations on the right-hand side. So when we talk about trusts and foundations, we mean typically grant opportunities from charitable trusts. So that might be the likes of Garfield Weston Foundation. Many housing associations have their own charitable trusts that give out grants. But there are lots of grant opportunities available to secure investment for your own community activity. Not just those foundations. There are the National Lottery Fund and all of the different lottery funders. There are thousands of trust foundations across the globe, and then there are, of course, government and statutory grants as well. So we'll go into that in a little bit more detail shortly, highlight a couple of opportunities. But that's something that we find that it's quite untapped in the housing sector. We found the same when we entered education. Very few schools and academy trusts were accessing grants from many of the trust and foundation opportunities that are out there, mainly just one, because of a lack of awareness of what's out there, and two, maybe not necessarily having the capacity or skill to access some of those opportunities. And we're finding the same in the housing sector. Moving clockwise around the wheel then, so fundraising, when we talk about that, we mean typically donations from the public, so that might be through crowdfunding or through individual fundraising campaigns, or that might also include major donors. So we know that we're in talks with a couple of housing associations who have charitable trusts, and they've managed to secure some significant donations from some wealthy individuals to support some of their community investment activities. So that might be sponsoring a particular program, that might be being a major donor or a part of the organization's core funding model, or that might be raising money for a specific project or specific campaign, like a new community facility, a new community hub, or a new building, for example. So lots of examples of that working across many other sectors. Again, not something that's been done too much in housing, but we see it kind of creeping into the sector at the moment. Moving on to corporate partnerships then. So what we mean here obviously is relationships with businesses. They take many forms, from in-kind donations to sponsorship of particular programs to actually delivering aspects of the program. We've got a separate slide on that, so I won't go into too much detail on that here. Business development, obviously quite a broad term, but this effectively is organisations using their own skills or expertise to develop new products that could then be sold or franchised to other organisations, and therefore then generate income for their community investment activity. So that might be developing a tool or a programme that works really well in your communities, and then other housing associations like the look of that, or other organisations like the look of that, and they'll pay to franchise that model from you, for example. It might be selling the services of your delivery team or your partner's delivery teams to go and deliver sessions for other organisations. Just thinking creatively about the services and products that you might be able to develop. The next area then around procurement is typically around saving money ultimately. So this is about where in your existing supply chain could you consolidate or procure more effectively in order to save money that you might be spending on a particular area that could then be redirected to community investment. It might also be featuring community investment within your procurement strategy. So, for example, referencing elements of the social value act within any tenders or supply chains that you have, and seeking more commitment from your suppliers to your existing community investment strategy in order to make your resources go further. And then the last area on that wheel is around asset utilization. So typically we see this as facility based. So looking at what facilities you have within your stock that could be used more effectively in order to one, provide services for your residents and your beneficiaries, two, to generate income that can then be redirected into community investment as well. So we've seen examples of housing associations dabbling in each of these areas. We're not aware of any at the moment who are doing extremely well in all of those areas. But the key part of this is about income diversity as well. So the likelihood is that not any single one of these areas will generate millions and millions of pounds for you to reinvest into the community investment. But if you have a blend of like activity across all of those areas, then you're likely to be able to generate significant amounts of income that can be used to deliver community investment activity. It should be said that some of that income might not go directly to your organisation, might not go directly to your housing association, but could go to residents groups, tenant management associations, who should all be able to explore some of these opportunities as well, and therefore could then directly generate income for some activity on the ground. Before we go into some of those areas, I think it's important to talk a bit about the impact of coronavirus on the fundraising landscape. So obviously we've been monitoring this pretty closely over the last couple of months, and the impact has been profound. So we know many organisations in the charitable sector particularly who have had a fall in donations. So particularly direct debit donations have dropped significantly over the course of the coronavirus pandemic. Although obviously specific fundraising campaigns have been extremely successful, over the last couple of months for particular coronavirus responses. But the ongoing work, or the long-term focus of many of these organisations, is likely to shift because their donations towards these causes have dropped significantly. An area of funding that on that wheel that hasn't been affected, has probably been affected positively, is the trust and foundations world. So many trusts and foundations are committing extremely large amounts of money to the coronavirus response throughout this period. We've seen lots of organisations making awards in the multi-million pound region for organisations that are obviously dealing with the immediate impact of coronavirus and responding to community needs, but also helping organisations transition the way they work from physically delivered sessions to digitally delivered sessions. Also covering the costs of small community organisations who, without grant income over this period, or without donation income over this period, are likely to go out of business. So typically we find that the trust and foundation landscape in periods of crisis responds well and invests more during this period than any other funder. So whilst maybe some areas like corporate income and individual giving income we might have to kind of put on the back burner for a while, some of those other areas like trust and foundations, procurement, business development are areas that are very much in demand right now. So we've seen funders realign some of their grant programs to focus on direct support. We've seen increased flexibility from trusts and foundations around reporting and payment schedules. So typically, if you secure a grant from a funder, you're required to report quite regularly on the outcomes that you deliver, sometimes quite onerously, and it's obviously quite often restricted to certain expenditure. they've completely relaxed. Many funders have completely relaxed these rules during this period, so they're expecting less reporting or being more flexible about how you report, and they're converting restricted funding to unrestricted funding to ensure that an organisation can spend it how they need to during this period. We've seen some circumstances where trusts and foundations are inviting grantees to request advance payments, so to help with cash flow. And we've seen that trusts and foundations are kind of leading the way in helping to leverage government and advocate for government to respond to the needs of vulnerable communities. And I'm sure that many of the organisations in the housing sector are amongst this. So moving on then, so onto the trusts and foundations landscape specifically. So we're seeing that this is in light of COVID-19, but actually the priorities haven't changed too much compared to before the pandemic. So we see that foundations are typically awarding, or the majority of grants that are coming out are focused on these kind of 5 main areas. So tackling loneliness and social isolation, particularly now. And I imagine amongst many of your own beneficiaries and residents, this is an area of focus, or likely to be an area of focus over the coming weeks and months as things start to hopefully open up again. Entrepreneurship, so encouraging organisations to think more creatively about how they might deliver services for communities moving forward, or how they might create jobs. We're working on a similar project, actually, on a focus project like this with Asta Group currently, so on social entrepreneurship, of which there's a huge amount of funding out there available. Improving mental and physical health has always been a focus of funders over the years, but ever more so now. Digital inclusion, naturally, with the move to things like this, everything being delivered digitally. And then building skills and taking people back into employment. So any kind of employability programs or services that you have delivered in the past or are looking to deliver are very much in demand by funders at the moment. So we're seeing that these are the kind of five kind of key trends or key focuses of trusts and foundations at the current time. Just conscious of time, so I'll whiz through a couple of these. But so here on this slide, we just had a couple of examples of funders that have responded to COVID-19 by releasing new funds. So some of them are sport-focused funders, but others like the National Lottery Community Fund, so have been giving out significant amounts, up to £500,000 per award. There are organisations like Big Society Capital who've released huge loan schemes to support the sector. Many of these opportunities will be open to housing associations or any charitable trust that you might have associated with your organisation, or local community organisations. And we're seeing there are around 5 or 6 opportunities being announced every week. And we've been publishing a bit of an update to the sector across all of our sectors on this. And it's really encouraging to see that there are still grant opportunities in this period, and probably more so than ever before. Just looking at corporate partnership types, so won't go into specific examples here, but what do we mean by corporate partnerships? So from a commercial perspective, this might be a relationship with a local business or a regional or national business who might then get a commercial benefit from that relationship. So they might be, a housing association might adopt them as their preferred supplier. It might be a more charitable relationship with a business. So it might be, as we just mentioned, so it might be a donation or a grant from a business. So for example, Barclays have announced huge amounts of funding as a result of coronavirus to lots of charities across the globe, many of which are here in the UK. Or that might be a business adopting your association or your cause as charity of the year. It might be value in kind. So, for example, many organisations we know, their relationships with businesses are involved in the actual delivery of the programme. So, if it's an employability-focused programme that you're delivering for your community organisation, for your community, the businesses then might volunteer and deliver part of the programme with you. So they might do do interviews, they might do job placements, that kind of thing. So whilst there's no financial benefit to your organisation, there's a direct social benefit and a direct benefit for your participants. And then more transactional advertising opportunities. So there might be sponsorship of a particular program, so that they can obviously talk about their product and put that in front of potential customers, or gain an affinity with your organization as a result of their product or service being associated with it. I think we're getting towards the end, but so just as an example of kind of business development and asset utilization in practice. So we have Parkhead Housing Association. We've obviously got the Housing Association there at the top, who, delivering a typical, sorry, there is animation as well. So delivering their traditional services. They've set up a development company that focuses on estate management, grounds maintenance. So that's an example of business development, using their services to generate their expertise to generate new income. From an asset utilization point of view, they've got a facility that they rent out as a specific community space and commercial office that generates income. And then they've diversified some of their services as well to provide private letting. So, I mean, there'll be thousands of examples of this across the sector, but just a quick example of how organisations have been reacting. So I think you're on mute, Luke.
Thank you. Yeah, so one of the underlying factors that underpin the strategy around income generation always is around the kind of governance structure of an organisation and the components that go into how the organisation operates. And within the housing sector, we found probably quite a mix of different company structures and different approaches to governance, which can impact either positively or negatively the size of opportunity available to the respective association. So from whether it's IPS, CIC, cooperative, charity, company limited by guarantee, these kind of structures will all have different pros and cons when it comes to ability to attract external investment from particularly trusted foundations, who often have their own idiosyncratic eligibility criteria depending on who and what they'll fund. And in this kind of similar vein, for central corporate partners as well, they'll be quite set on what types of organisations they'll fund. So it's certainly something to be very mindful of when looking at that income generation planning, as to what your current structure is and how that might impact your ability to generate funding, and then what options are available to help increase that size of opportunity. So a lot of organisations we work with will either we sometimes help them set up parallel organisations, so a parallel charitable entity that's associated to the kind of parent organisation, but that unlocks different opportunities for them and has its own set of objectives and charitable focus. Sometimes we morph an existing structure into a more suitable one, where we've found that actually the current structure isn't necessarily fit for purpose for that organisation. So there's lots of different factors to consider. There's so many different models out there that it can be quite a minefield to kind of operate through. But ultimately, with the kind of the more ostensibly charitable the purpose and the setup of the model, generally speaking, the greater the level of opportunity in some of these areas. So yeah, having a charitable component to the organisation absolutely opens up fundraising opportunities. It also provides a lot of opportunity around tax benefits, tax relief, perception externally with partners, with communities, with potential funders. It helps to delineate between some of the core operational bits that an organisation is going to do and some bits that perhaps fit in a more community-focused, outwardly facing, charitable box. Sometimes it's around having a social enterprise as an income-generating tool in of itself, actually. So there's lots of different reasons to do it, and it's something that sometimes there's apprehension around and a bit of reticence to explore from particularly at board level. But we would certainly be encouraging all organisations to just have an introspection and exploration of the different options available to them to see actually, are we right now? Is this absolutely going to help us to achieve what we want to achieve in the coming years? Or do we need to think a bit differently about how we might set ourselves up to really maximise this opportunity as well?
Okay, Luke, I'm just conscious of the time, and I would like to put some questions to you guys, because I've got my own questions, and we've got one come in so far, and I'd encourage others to use the Q&A function to post their questions. Can you just wrap up in just a couple of minutes what you have left?
Yeah, absolutely. We were on to the last slide. So good
oh,
time.
fab.
Good time to see. Yeah, no worries.
Sorry.
Apologies, guys. I know we kind of got carried away a bit there, actually. But yeah, so factors to consider. We'll skip through that one, Rahul. So if we just go to the end, just to say, yeah, as Rahul mentioned earlier, I think our newsletter at the moment, particularly in light of the kind of COVID context, is a really useful portal for people to just find out what's going on at the moment in terms of the broader fundraising landscape, how trusts and foundations and the sector is reacting. So it's really useful information there. Obviously free to sign up, so please have a look at that. And just to say, obviously we'll go into Q&A now, but if anybody's got anything else they want to talk about or any questions they want to pick up with us directly, that contact details are there as well, so please do get in touch. And thanks everyone for listening to that. And yes, Steve, perhaps over to you then in terms of the Q&A.
That was brilliant. It was so comprehensive. This is I gave up kind of housing management in 1999 because whilst it's an absolutely essential job, I think I only went so far with it. But this was the stuff that really interested me, but I never managed to get into because I ended up doing back office. I just think it's brilliant the way the thing's evolving. Peter Moore down in Cornwall's got a question that actually I was going to ask, and I'd like to add a little bit to it. And what he's saying is many people watching this will be working for quite small organisations, so they need to kind of short circuit doing the full Monty on this. They just haven't got all the resources to chuck at it. What advice have you got for those smaller organisations about how they can short circuit some of this stuff and measure their impact without spending shed loads of money on it and shed loads of time? And I guess my question comes at the start of that as well, is have you got any clever ideas how you can short circuit some of the strategic side of what you were talking about how you kind of identify need, community kind of investment need, and how that then translates to the most appropriate interventions. So if you like, there's two bits to this. Is one, how do you identify the need and come up with the killer interventions? And then how do you measure the impact if you're a really small organisation without loads of resources?
Sure. Rahul, do you want to take the measuring and I'll take the strategy?
Yep, sure. Okay. So I guess one thing to say, I think, is that across all of this, particularly on the income generation side of things, is that actually smaller organisations are best placed to attract funding from most of these opportunities, so that they are better placed than the larger organisations, and that's for a couple of reasons. I think one is that most of those organisations are typically place-based, and so associated with a particular area, and therefore have a closer eye on the needs, or closer relationship with their local community, and therefore are closer to the needs of their local community, and also are not seen as big commercial entities awash with assets and cash. So, which is the kind of thing that funders and donors want to see. So they want to see that you're relatively flexible, relatively close to the needs of your community, and in some instances led by your community. So we've seen examples over the last couple of years. The trend amongst particularly trusts and foundations and donors is that they want to see interventions that are designed by the community for the community. And I know that's straying a little over into what Luke was going to talk about. But in terms of evidencing that and reporting on that to funders and donors, I think particularly, so if you're bidding for funding or you're proposing to donors to sponsor a particular program, you need to, one, demonstrate how you're led by your community. So, for example, how has the community designed the program or the intervention that you're delivering or seeking to deliver? I can't stress that enough, that funders and donors want to see evidence of how the program's been designed by the community, whether those are forums that you've held, whether that is literally the activities being delivered by the beneficiaries themselves. So you might be training beneficiaries and then them actually delivering the intervention themselves, and showing, where possible, that you've done a survey of your community, and you can provide evidence of the survey that you've done. I think when we talk about evidencing need for an intervention or need for a program, this doesn't need to be a huge academic study that's been done. It's obviously relevant relative to the size of the funding ask that you're making, but where possible, just demonstrating that you've consulted with the people who are ultimately going to be the beneficiaries of it. And then from a reporting point of view, I know that there's a trend at the moment within housing to do a lot of work on social return on investment. And I guess we would say that actually, from a fundraising point of view, social return on investment is not that necessary, I'd say. So if you don't necessarily have the resources to spend a lot of money on demonstrating, how much money has been, or what the social value of your work is, then fret not. I don't think that will ultimately affect your ability to attract funding from many of these sources. Ultimately, you need to be showing that from each of the interventions that you deliver, there is a difference from when you started to when you ended. So even if it is as simple as doing a pre-project survey with the beneficiaries who are likely to be involved in any activity that you're going to do, and then a survey at the midpoint and a survey at the end point, and you can demonstrate that there has been a change in any outcome, any social outcome, from the start to the end, and that you followed a relatively effective research method as part of that. So it doesn't need to be an academic study. If you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, then you probably need to be looking at academic studies that evidence the impact of that program. But if we're talking about smaller projects, you're seeking funding for those, a pre, mid, and post survey, an impact report on each of the programs that you do. Doesn't need to be anything too academic, and you should still be able to secure funding for that.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, just absolutely agree with all of that. And just to add, I know we've focused on some of the examples within our slides were around some big organisations, and it's all relative. And actually, it could be a single housing estate with a really small group of people that we're focused on, and that's fine. And it just needs to show your strategy needs to reflect the people you're supporting, and it just needs to be. It could be really, really hyper local, but as long as it reflects those people, no matter how big, how small, that's what matters. And it's showing funders, it's showing external partners. You've got a clear focus on who you're helping, how you're helping them, and why you're helping them. And just as Rahul was saying, there's a real move towards just telling stories as well. It doesn't need to, if it's a small level, it could be around some really personalized case studies that show the impact you've had on someone's life. So it can be all sorts of different cost-effective ways of demonstrating impact that really just tell the story of why you exist and the impact you're delivering.
Right. Well, I think that's helpful, because this is certainly the measurement of this is something that the sector and much bigger organisations have struggled with for donkey's years, and I think certainly the smaller sector needs to short circuit that. I'm just conscious of the time, but I just wanted to very briefly pick up the survey idea. Would this be simply a case of surveying beneficiaries and almost kind of asking them a question, has this made a difference to you? Could it be that simple?
It can be that simple. So it can literally be a case of, some organisations won't necessarily do it before it started, and they'll do it all retrospectively. And they'll say, what as part of this, I say survey, it can be a forum, it could be an interview, it could be, it doesn't necessarily need to be a formal written survey. Where an organisation asks, what have been the main differences that this project has had on you, or this activity has had on you? to what degree would you say that activity can be attributed to the change that you've undergone as a result, and what would you change about the project moving forward? So I think I'd also say that don't be afraid to report on things that didn't work. So there has been a movement, I guess, amongst many funders where they want to see actually what hasn't worked, or where didn't beneficiaries experience a difference or a change, and ultimately how have you learned from that from a previous project. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's been really useful. And at the risk of completely failing as a chair here on timekeeping, I'd really like to get one last question in from Emily. And what she's basically saying is lots of commercial organizations have taken a hit thanks to coronavirus. Any top tips on wheedling money out of them, given that they've got probably other things on their mind?
Yeah, that is a tricky one. So I guess it's where you're able to identify that they have taken a financial hit, then it's being careful about the ask in terms of actually focusing on in-kind opportunities in the first instance. So where can they volunteer time? For example, we know there's been huge examples over the last couple of weeks and months of companies directing their employees who've been on furlough to volunteer for local organisations and deliver services for local organisations. So there's lots of in-kind benefit that can be generated in the short term. I think actually you'd be surprised by the number of corporates who, despite having a strain on their resources, are still working with charities and community organisations. And I'd say if you don't ask, you won't know. So I think it's literally a case of developing a proposition that you think that they might be interested in, and just putting the question to them. I think whilst they are under a lot of strain, almost every business we know is reacting in some way to the community, and will want to be seen to be doing something with community as part of this period.
Yeah, can I just add to that quickly, just to say, absolutely, as Rahul says, it's think long term now with corporates. Get engaged now, try and build partnerships that will turn into financial investment. It might be 12 months, it might be 2 years from now in terms of when the financial part comes in, but you need to put the groundwork in now. And actually things are changing, and companies, particularly corporate companies, will be looking at, again, that horrible phrase, but looking at hyper-local, we think, in terms of once this is over, really supporting their communities again, and being seen to be focused on the areas where they work and the staff that they support. So I think that local, community-focused view will be more prominent than ever when we come through this period. So yeah, now's the time to start engaging, get and build foundations for the future. Absolutely. Brilliant.
Great advice. Guys, thanks so much for your time and effort that you put into this. It was a really, I think, a really useful kind of masterclass in kind of nailing community investment. I'm sure our attendees and future attendees, because we've got this recorded, I think they'll get a huge amount out of it. So thanks so much for that. We'd really like you to come back one day at some point in the future. Either in person or through the ether, to perhaps pick up another aspect of this. That would be brilliant. So I've taken up enough of everybody's time. So thanks all our attendees for this. We hope you've enjoyed it. And we'll see you through the ether again at some point in the future. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Thanks, guys.